Okay, episode 9, 2008. From whence shall we expect the approach of danger? Shall some transatlantic giant step the earth and crush us at a blow? Never. If destruction be our lot, we ourselves must be its author and finisher.
Now, on Inside the Buffalo...
Wait! Can't use that title. How about this? All right.
Hello once again, it's time for Down and Drought, your weekly walk down memory lane with the Buffalo Bills and their 17-year playoff absence. Every week we're looking at a specific season of the playoff drought. The calendar turns to 2008. A lot of things happened to the Buffalo Bills in this season. I'm Prescott Rossi, alongside me, of course, Thad Brandon, and sitting in the Dave Yates Memorial seat, Mark Ludwiczak. At this time in 2008, who are you writing for in 08?
With Bills Digest at the time.
So with Bills Digest, you've been following this team your whole life, but interacting with them on a professional level since when?
I started when Duran started, so 2 years before that. I've been full-time since then.
And so that is well over a decade of watching this team. So few people know what it's like to really interact with this team, much like Marv Levy. And we start 2008, actually on the last day of 2007, December 31st, New Year's Eve. Marv Levy steps down as Bills general manager. He's 82, so you knew the Golden Boy era wasn't going to last forever. But just, fellas, your thoughts of after another season without the playoffs, another 7-9 season that Marv Levy is stepping down as Bills GM.
The thing with that move wasn't so much Levy stepping down. I mean, he was never really a GM. He was always going to be a figurehead at best. But the thing was, who are they going to get after that? There was going to be a legitimate GM search. There were scouts' names and GM and real legitimate football administrative people that were on the list to become the Bills' next GM. And then they just picked the guy who happened to be hanging around pretty much.
Yeah. What were your thoughts on Marv and his tenure?
10 years to the day since he retired as a head coach, which is kind of bizarre. But, Ralph still had a bad taste from the Tom Donahoe era in his mouth. And I think that's what led him to not do anything drastic and go in-house instead of searching. That Donahoe era burned him so badly, he didn't want to go outside, and that's why they went to Russ.
I found bites and quotes from Marv Levy around this time. He gives an interview to the Buffalo News where he says, "It was about mid-season I decided it wasn't fulfilling enough for me." And you go, you're the general manager of the team. I read these quotes, and 10 years later, it's easy to have hindsight on it. But to me, did you kind of feel like, did Marv Levy, was he fully invested in this job?
Well, he was 80 whatever. At this point,
82.
He was doing it because he felt
82.
like it. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But he was doing it because he felt like it. I mean, think about if you're Marv Levy. 4 Super Bowls, Hall of Fame. You don't need this job.
No, you don't.
So once you didn't feel like doing it anymore, you didn't do it anymore. I mean, that's what you do when you're 82. That's what we all should be doing when we're 82.
Right? We'd be so lucky. Yeah. Well, a couple days later, Saturday, January 5th, J.P. Lossman's agent tells the AP his client wants to be traded. And this is coming off a season where Lossman has been benched for Trent Edwards. And I have to imagine in the media the thought is like, okay, I don't know where you're going to go, but
and
bye,
better,
JP.
What you're going to get for him, too.
Yeah.
I mean, he still had the pedigree of being a former first-round pick, but we all saw what he was going to be, which was, almost nothing. And now you've got Russ Brandon, you're running the show, and none of us really think he's a legit GM. I mean, the hire of Brandon just made, look, we all understood the idea of Russ Brandon working his way up through the organization and then getting the top job, but no one thought that this was the cure-all to all the Bills' problems.
Well, I do think we found out a little later on that Dick Duran had more power and more say than I think any of us maybe imagined at the time, from people that I talked to. I think he and Tom Modrak really controlled that. I don't know how much influence Russ had, but with Lossman, I do know. I mean, they didn't want to trade him at the time. So they still had belief in him. I don't know if that was a lack of trust in Mr. Edwards, but
probably more a lack of options.
Yeah,
where were they going to go?
But they felt, like you said, what are they going to get for him? But I know they didn't want to trade him at the time. Russ told us that. So.
Yeah, and the Bills basically straight, like, you're going to play the final year of your contract as a member of the Buffalo Bills. Well, a week after that, Russ Brandon is officially announced as the team's chief operating officer, not the general manager. He is the COO. Your thoughts of as Ralph has kind of wiped out the GM job, and there's kind of this triumvirate of Brandon, John Guy, and Tom Modrak running the show.
Yeah, I think, like Mark was saying, the Tom Donahoe era, and we've brought this up in previous weeks, it wasn't just the football team. It wasn't just the coaching staff. It was everybody in the organization that wanted no part of what had happened there. And Russ Brandon, look, for all the junk that Russ Brandon has taken recently when it comes to Bill's drought era, at the time, Russ Brandon had been successful at every job he was given.
A Fisher grad, Brandon came up through the business side of the Bills, but has been exceptionally successful. He was the driving force behind moving Buffalo's training camp to St. John Fisher. According to today's Bills press release, Brandon will oversee day-to-day operations at One Bills Drive, including business and football operations.
You know, if they were going to go outside, you're going to at least give Russ a shot. And I guess looking back, it could have worked. It probably was never going to work, but it could have worked.
Well, again, the problem was, and we've had this issue in recent years with Doug Whaley. Who really has the ultimate say and the ultimate power? And funny how everything comes around again. But,
sure does.
But yeah, at the time, it was who really has the power. And yeah, that Donahoe, that reign of terror just left, just such a bad taste in his mouth. I think he wanted Russ to try and unify. I think he felt if he didn't have one GM over everybody, that they could kind of be on the same page, and I mean, it didn't work out.
And
that's what he was thinking.
And there was a bit of pseudo nepotism there because later, Russ would come to be a guy that Ralph considered to be his son, almost like a son.
Trusted him.
So this is maybe a terrible analogy, but this is kind of like President Trump giving his kids and his in-laws jobs in the White House. But I mean, it's just
everything worked out great.
Yeah, exactly right. So Russ was that revered by Ralph and really had earned the opportunity to do a lot of things because he was that good at everything else he had done prior to that.
Yeah, Russ Brandon, 40 years old when he's named the COO of the Bills. And what I've found is that a lot of people, no outside faces, no new names. It's going to be continuity with this franchise. And I know at times, and especially as they've gone through so many head coaches and so many GMs, you kind of want that continuity, but this doesn't seem like the right continuity. Was that the feeling at the time then?
Again, I think it came back to Russ. It was just not a move that really inspired anything. There wasn't a desire for continuity because there was nothing that you really wanted. Dick Duran had gone 7-9 2 years in a row. We knew there was no quarterback. I guess that at running back they were okay. They kept on finding running backs, but there wasn't. Whether the Bills wanted to call it continuity, I think. We've brought it up twice already, and I hate to go back to it, but it's all about not wanting to try the Tom Donahoe experiment again. That's why you say anything you want to say. It's Russ Brandon earned it. It's continuity. It's Dick Duran had power. Whatever it is, they did not want to just give it to an outsider.
Yeah.
The power.
Well, and a little note that I found a couple days later, and it's just funny how it all kind of comes around, and you see names kind of pop up and then disappear. You don't think about them much for a few years. On January 28th, Nathaniel Hackett, their future offensive coordinator, is named offensive quality control coach, and Alex Van Pelt promoted to QB coach. And we'll talk about Hackett down the road, but I just thought that that's funny. There's the first instance of Nathaniel Hackett. Friday, February 1st, right before the Super Bowl, Roger Goodell announces that the Bills will play a regular season game in Toronto starting with 2008. And this had kind of been all but assured since the first conversations of this in October of 2007. To hear that finality from the commissioner, someone with Western New York ties, what was the feeling like, and what were your reports like at that time in February of 2008?
The short answer is nervousness bordering on the sky is falling, because there were reports about this isn't just 5 games in Toronto or 8 games, including the preseason. This was the first step towards the move. Now, none of that was for sure, but you couldn't help but feel that way.
Fans hated it. I don't know if there's a stronger word that I can use. The fans hated this so much. The radio in Buffalo was absolutely out of control at this time. Fans couldn't have hated it anymore.
And it wasn't just about losing the home game and the possibility of losing the franchise. It was the competitive balance idea of now the Bills are going to play 8 road games, 7 home games in a neutral site every year, as opposed to everybody else who's got 8 and 8. So there were so many parts of this that were
Ralph's age. I mean, it's just all of it combined into one.
And Goodell even says that the plan is to put this game in Toronto late in the year so that they can remove the weather element. And you think, that's one of the competitive advantages of the Bills.
And on top of that, Ralph said he wanted to be against a good team. So you're going to take what turned out to be division opponents at one point, but games where you would need to play in Orchard Park, now you're going to move it to Toronto.
And a couple days later, Wednesday, February 6th, they have a news conference in Toronto. Ted Rogers and Ralph Wilson sitting side by side. And I mean, you talk about the fox in the hen house or whatever, oh my God, Ralph is sitting next to the guy that's going to take over the team whenever Ralph croaks.
Now, News 8 Sports with John Kutchko. Bills owner Ralph Wilson brought his fiery style across the border today to Toronto, where his football team will play 8 games, 5 of them regular season games in Toronto over the next 5 seasons. Wilson and the rest of the Bills brass outlined their plans at a news briefing there this morning. It's the latest effort to regionalize the team, which is what brought them to training camp here in Rochester.
I would say, I don't know, I could be wrong here, maybe 20% of the fans that come to the games in Buffalo are from Rochester. Now, that didn't happen before we moved our training camp and expanded our brand and everything else connected with the Bills to the east. What am I going to say to the fans in Buffalo? I'm going to say, hey, I can't speculate. I can't speculate what's going to happen in the future.
That's real promising. Well, you can speculate on whether you want to go to these games. Go to billsintoronto.com to get on a list. Now, you're not committing yourself to buying the tickets, but you'll at least be kept up to date and when you can buy them, and that'll be after the schedule comes out in April.
Everything about that just felt icky. I mean, for lack of a better term. It was wrong. It was, this was not what the Bills were about. This was not what Western New York pro football was about. But it certainly looked like it was what it was going to be about in the near future.
Well, and the tone of that press conference, I mean, they were bragging kind of about how much money they could charge tickets. Mm-hmm. It was just so surreal and bizarre.
That was the underrated part of the first few months of that, about how everyone talked about this is the greatest idea ever. Yeah. We're going to have people begging us for tickets. We're going to make so much money. And we talked about this before. In Rochester, I could kind of dial away from it and think, well, if the Toronto money keeps the Bills in Western New York, I can kind of live with 7 home games. But in Buffalo, you couldn't do that because it was, something that the city was losing. And it wasn't just about the team you rooted for, it was about city pride.
Well, it was bizarre because, again, at the time, playing a couple games in Toronto wasn't going to really change. If a new owner comes in, he wants to move the team, he's going to move the team. Right. Is one game in Toronto proving that that you have access to this market really going to change anybody's mind, or is it a money grab, or is it whatever? I mean, it rubbed everybody the wrong way. It was an awful, awful decision.
We came up with some great partners. We suggested this format of these 5 years of games to create a little excitement, folks. And not the same old thing, day after week. So, we're going to play these games up here. What am I going to say to the fans in Buffalo? I'm going to say, hey, I can't speculate. I can't speculate what's going to happen in the future.
All right, Ralph, a Hall of Fame quarterback Jim Kelly in town today. Kelly and CGI Communications announcing a partnership where the former Bill star and CGI chairman Bob Bartosiewicz will co-produce a sports reality TV show. I talked with Jim about the Bills playing some of those games north of the border.
Would it be my first move? Probably not. But I also understand that there's a lot of Canadians that do love the Buffalo Bills. And if we can go up there and not take off too many people in the Western New York area that we're taking one home game away from them, then why not? I mean, it might draw more excitement. Who knows what the future is?
Yeah, got that right. The Sabres hosting the Devils tonight.
Ted Rogers with $4.9 billion. He blamed the media for dreaming up this nightmare scenario of the Bills moving to Toronto. Ralph has a bite in this press conference that you go like, oh man, I can only imagine being a Bills fan or even someone in the media covering the team, because this is a big part of what you do. When Ralph says people don't have jobs in Buffalo, they move out of Western New York. Toronto is a viable NFL city. You go like, oh my God, this is happening. And you're watching it play out in front of you.
We're going to spend the next 5 weeks or so on this. And you look back on it, almost literally everything that was done in that series, from the overriding decision and reason behind it to small things like the parking and the halftime entertainment, was a disaster. Everything. And really, I almost wonder if it was handled so badly if it not benefited Western New York, because now
they took a dive.
People look at Toronto now like, I don't know if that's a really viable NFL market anymore because of how terrible this series was.
You mean you didn't like Gangnam Style?
Oh man,
come on,
that was the best one.
It's a 5-year deal that coincides with the end of their lease with Ralph Wilson Stadium in 2012. It's just every sign here looks so bad, and now, okay, well, that game's not coming for a couple months. Now you have to think about like an off-season free agency, a draft, and whatever could be coming down the pike. I can only imagine just kind of how insane that
It was hard to get back into just concentrating on regular football stuff because the Toronto cloud had officially moved in and was going to rain for the next few years, and it was a hard rain, and it was an acid rain. It was hard to deal with.
Well, yeah, like you said, I mean that cloud was always there again with Ralph getting up there in age. It just, but the Toronto just completely overtook it. It was.
So free agency begins. The Bills make a big signing right at the start. They signed linebacker Kavika Mitchell from the Super Bowl champion New York Giants.
Big is not the right word to use to that.
Well, it was sarcasm. Maybe I didn't lay it on thick enough.
He was a good player, but he wasn't a game changer.
Yep.
You know, he did
and a 5-year, $17.5 million deal too.
If he didn't come from the Giants, I don't know if he would have made that much news. You know, it was good. It was okay.
He fit the Giants a lot more than the Bills. He really, I mean, he was a.
Well, when you have Strahan and Armstead.
Yeah, he was just he was perfect for that system. He was okay in Buffalo.
The next day, the Bills make a trade with Jacksonville for Marcus Stroud. They trade a 3rd and a 5th, and here you go again. The Bills refusing to build through the draft. They trade for a guy coming off major ankle surgery, but was a Pro Bowler in 03, 04, and 05. The feelings about the Marcus Stroud trade, I know looking back you see excitement for it, but was that genuine at the time?
I barely remember he was on the team.
Well, you know what's funny? I forgot about it, but looking up really, I mean, he was a stud in Jacksonville. I mean, there was no doubt about that. I remember when he was drafted back in the day, the Bills fans wanted the Bills to take him then. I mean, he was a good player throughout his career. Buffalo's run defense was so bad in these years that, I mean, I think these signings, that they needed to address the run defense. The Stroud one worked for one season. He was good that first year. He was very good. Next year, you could tell he was in the twilight of his career. And
he was already 30 years old.
The wheels, but the first year it worked. Second year it did not.
And they signed Spencer Johnson to kind of shore up that interior of the defensive line. NFL Draft, Saturday, April 26th and April 27th. The official debut of the new NFL logo. The curly L is gone after 4 decades. It was a little note that I noticed.
Major changes,
right? Day 1 of the draft, the Bills have the 11th overall pick, and they draft Leodis McKelvin, cornerback out of Troy. The Bills have a lot of holes, but is this the right guy that they should have drafted at that point?
I remember this was a solid pick.
He was the highest ranked defensive back.
He was considered a top 10 pick. They needed a corner. There was some questions, coming out of Troy. That's not the biggest. It's not an SEC school. It's it's not like a lot of the players they've drafted recently. So that was a question mark there, but they had a need corner.
It was corner or receiver. They ended up going receiver round 2. So they had they addressed that anyway.
Sure did.
Yeah, right. They got somebody to play.
Speaking of
a receiver, Leodis McKelvin. It was always the press conferences with him, even the first one. Leodis, bless his heart, just had trouble slowing himself down enough to say anything that was understandable.
Yeah, and that's thick Southern drawl.
Well, and I'll say this again: people would make comments and stuff. He was a bright guy.
No, that's exactly true.
It was not. It was not anything to do with intellect. It was the thick.
It couldn't make it from
accent.
here to here, from the head down to the mouth.
And God bless Alan Wilson from the Buffalo News. He could understand everything. He was in the South, so we would go to him if we couldn't understand something. He'd be our kind of a Leodis translator.
Right.
He would help us out.
Once you kind of got used to it, you could translate it.
Yeah.
But I don't know. In newspaper, you get away with, okay, I know he said I'll just write it.
Yeah.
In TV, there were some sound bites like, we just can't use this. No one's going to understand it unless we put subtitles on it. It felt like an insult to put subtitles on it.
Just showing that I could be able to move, so I could be able to come in and compete for a starting spot. Being able to basically just show that I belong here. And then I deserve this pick that they picked me at.
Second round, the Bills, they need a wide receiver. They get the tallest one in the draft. 6'6", James Hardy out of Indiana. And I know when you think Big Ten wide receivers, you go, Indiana.
Right.
Now the other wide receivers available at this time, they're not 6'6", but they are considerably better. Deshaun Jackson, Pierre Garçon, Eddie Royal, Harry Douglas.
The three of us were better than James Hardy. He was not.
Well, that was good. Yeah. In the media room at One Bills Drive, you hear James Hardy, wide receiver, Indiana.
Well, at the time, it made all the sense in the world. They had been talking about how they needed a big red zone receiver.
Right.
I mean, it was on paper.
Because they missed molds.
Yeah, on paper, this was the guy they needed. Again, he's not played on paper. He just.
Because on paper, there was a 6 with a dash and a 6 next to it. And that's all you need to see.
Yeah.
James Hardy, 6'6". It could have been anybody. I mean, he could have played, for the Big Ten of London, if they had that sort of conference.
Or Big Ten basketball.
Exactly, right. And maybe he should have.
And in college, he used his size terrifically, but the problem was he was playing at Indiana. He only ran a couple routes. So you really didn't know if the guy could get away from defenders. He was running 3 different routes and then just being taller than everybody.
And injuries really hurt him too, early too. I mean, it was right in the first training
drops.
camp.
The first OTAs, you could tell he was dropping the ball way more than any second-round pick should.
As a receiver, you have so many things you have to learn off the field, especially with the plays and how the different coverages, and there's maybe 5 different plays in one. But like they said, it usually take receivers up to 3 years. I'm trying to cut that down to maybe hopefully 1 in this season. I'll be effective.
And you mentioned gems that they would find in the later rounds. In this same draft in 2008, the 7th round, pick 224, Stevie Johnson, wide receiver out of Kentucky. And we'll spend a lot of time talking about him, but here's the Takeo Spikes trade paying off for the Bills years later because just this throwaway 7th round pick from Philadelphia becomes Stevie Johnson. That was one thing that I found that I just went, wow, okay, that's a nice find for the Bills. But the good times did not last long in this offseason in 2008. Saturday, May 31st, at 3:30 in the morning on the corner of Chippewa and Delaware in Buffalo, Marshawn Lynch involved in a hit and run. And working in news, working in media, obviously at 3:30 in the morning, you're not anticipating anything like that, but walk me through that the following Sunday and then like, oh man, the Bills' first-round pick, their star running back, is involved in a very bad accident.
Yeah.
Or bad incident, I
well,
guess.
It was a bad incident, and nobody wanted to talk about it. I mean, for us, that was a big part of it. Marshawn didn't want to talk about it. The Bills didn't want to talk about it. So there was all this controversy about this star player, and it took a while to figure out what happened. How long is he going to be suspended? What's the deal here? There was, again, we talked about clouds hanging over this franchise. Here's your star running back. This happens in May. It never ended.
And it hangs over for a full month before it all wraps up.
Marshawn's a big part of that too, because he, as we saw in Super Bowls later, he was one of the main reasons that we got no answers because he would not talk. There were OTAs. There were opportunities to speak with him. He kept on, not going to talk to the media. We're not going to be available. He didn't practice. They found any excuse they could to not allow Marshawn Lynch to address the media.
I mean, really, and after this incident, I don't remember if he talked the rest of the year. I mean, we're not talking just a couple weeks here. I mean, he was just. He was pretty much done.
The next time he talks is week 3 when they get ready to play the Oakland Raiders, his hometown.
Right.
So and this process, the following week, the Buffalo News reports that witnesses saw Lynch driving, but there's no word from anybody. The police, even the Erie County DA, Frank Clark, says he's frustrated over the lack of progress. This is pretty unprecedented stuff here, considering a grand jury calls it a last resort. They subpoena Russ Brandon about this. I mean, throughout this
they thought
ordeal,
about subpoenaing, bringing Ralph Wilson in to talk, the owner.
So finally, on June 27th, Lynch apologizes, pleads guilty to failure to exercise due care. It's bumped down to a misdemeanor a traffic violation, not a misdemeanor. So he avoids the ire of Roger Goodell, but now he's on the radar. He's obviously been in the news now going on 4 weeks. So much was made when Marv was hired about character. We're going to be this team full of character. And Willis McGahee would run his mouth, and then they got rid of him. And now here's the guy you replaced Willis McGahee with, and now he's finding himself in the police blotter. How frustrating was it to just be like the Bills they can't get this right?
It was hard, and I think going back to, Marshawn not giving answers, you couldn't get into his head at all. Whatever there was, whatever might have been going on, you could not come up with that side of the story. And it kind of left everything open. You had to, almost guess at why is this happening? Why is, he not responsible enough to, again, not be out at 3:30 in the morning, regardless of what happened afterwards.
Yeah, like you said, it wasn't a clear-cut situation from the start. It took a while for everything to come out, and it made it kind of hang over the franchise longer than if that week we had known exactly what happened. He apologized or said this. These were the charges. It just kept. It was such a.
I mean, he doesn't have to talk to the media. But at the same time, when the incident begins on May 31st and the plead is June 27th, that just is going to be in the news every day.
Yeah, it just took longer than most of these incidents, take.
So we go to training camp, and our friend Mr. Whitner guarantees the playoffs. Paz says we should definitely be thinking of a playoff year. Just your thoughts after, 9 seasons, 8 seasons without making the playoffs? And now you have first round and second round picks guaranteeing playoffs.
This was the beginning of rolling my eyes every time I heard about any prediction in training camp. I mean, this was really where it started. Before you'd hear guys talk about we want to make the playoffs, we want to do this, you take it seriously, but you move on. When Dante Whitner guaranteed playoffs, personally, I was done. And I don't care. If you want to say it, fine. We know what's happened recently. We know who your quarterback is. We know what your coach has done the last 2 years. You can say what you want. I don't care.
Well, it's strange looking back in hindsight because this year was, it ended up being another awful year. But that was the belief. I mean, his teammates loved him for saying that.
Yes.
I mean, we tried to, do you really like that he put this much pressure on you? The players loved it because they really felt that at this time and Duran's tenure there and all that it was playoffs or bust. But again, it just ends up, in hindsight, just looking.
Well, I was going to say, Dante Whitner, obviously his relationship with Western New York now isn't good. But at this time, I think he's going into his 3rd season with the Bills. What was it like interacting with him in the locker room? And it seems like this is a guy that's going to give you great bites all the time.
At the time, he was phenomenal.
Yes.
I mean, he was one of my go-to guys. You needed to say you're working on a story and you don't have that quote. You talk to, okay, I'll talk to Dante, and then you get it. I mean, really, he was very gracious and he was very kind to us reporters. I didn't have any issues with Dante Whitner, which is why, to me, it was kind of surprising after he leaves Buffalo, and then some of this stuff would come out, and you kind of roll your, really? He said what? Because he seemed to be enjoying it here.
I think he was a bright guy, a stand-up guy, a guy not afraid to speak his mind, but at that point, he was still a first-round pick. And when you're a first-round pick, you have that aura that, you're the man. You're the first over, whatever, 8th, 10th pick, whatever he was. And the longer he went without producing at that level and playing on teams that didn't even come close to producing at that level, the more angst was directed at him, and then I think it spun with him.
You're right,
he couldn't
because he
handle
was good, but again, when you're an 8th overall pick, fans expect you to be, Ronnie Lott. I mean, and he wasn't. And as the years went on, and a couple more mistakes happened, they did get on him.
The other big news out of training camp, Jason Peters holds out for the entire training camp, and during the drought, I don't know if there's another player that holds out for this period of time. Here's a guy, his story's kind of remarkable. He's, former tight end. He's done all these different things, and now he's adjusted his career to be at an all-pro level for multiple seasons, and he holds out for all of training camp. Was the mood with the media at this time on more Peters' side or more with the Bills and, hey, you have a contract, that you signed, that you still have 3 years left on, come back and play?
I think it was more with Peters. I think, he had earned his money. He had, now give the Bills credit for figuring it out, that we have a tight end, we can make him into a tackle, and they made him into a very good one. But at that point, he was a tackle on a team that did not have a very good offensive line, that had a revolving door at offensive line. And, I don't remember the exact details of what he was rumored to want and what the Bills had cap-wise, but he was a guy the Bills needed to keep.
He wanted big money. The thing was, on the other side of it, was he had just re-upped, I want to say, a year or two before. So he wasn't on his undrafted contract. So that was on the other side of it. But, again, talking about things hanging over the franchise. I remember Peters' watch. We were at a May OTA, and we're asking other offensive linemen about Jason Peters. There are always other things away from the football field hanging over this team this year.
Missing all of training camp, Jason Peters was fined $560,000. But he never missed a game check. And, when you play in the NFL, that's where, you obviously make all your dough. Week 1 of the NFL season in 2008, after all that preamble, we finally made it to week 1, and everything goes great for the Buffalo Bills against the Seattle Seahawks. Roscoe Parrish has a 63-yard punt return for a touchdown. Mormon has a touchdown pass to Ryan Denny. The Bills win 34-10. Marcus Stroud has 2 sacks. We've seen this how many times over the drought. Week 1, the Bills come out and they smack somebody around, and here's another example.
It was a great feeling, especially with the Mormon touchdown pass. That's all everybody wanted to talk about. Wow.
It was a great play.
Look how great we are. We're won by 2 touchdowns, and our punter's even throwing touchdown passes. So, the feeling was positive. I mean, they like you said, they did everything right. But as also comes up a lot in the drought, when things go really good for the Bills, there's dumb stuff in there. This isn't the quarterback throwing for 400 yards and 4 touchdowns. There's punt return touchdowns. There's kickers throwing. There's stupid stuff, and this was another example.
Seattle was just steamrolled that game. They weren't ready. It wasn't like the Bills quarterback threw for 5 touchdowns.
Right. They didn't come out, wow, the offensive defense is really good. It's, well, they ran a kickback and they had a fake punt that worked or a fake field goal. So great, they must be fantastic.
Bobby April.
Oh, man. And, you talk about quarterbacks that can throw for 500 yards. One of them that can do that goes down in week 1. Tom Brady is on the receiving end of a tackle from Bernard Pollard against the Chiefs, and Brady's done for the entire year. And this is coming off the 18-1 season for the Patriots. Is there, you don't want to cheer a guy getting hurt, but the fact that Brady is not in the picture for an entire season, you have to think, is the door here open for the Buffalo Bills in 2008?
I think most people cheered it.
In the AFC East. In the
AFC East, I think. And again, it's not like you want the guy to get hurt, obviously, but the Patriots were in the midst of their run. People knew what they were coming off that season. I think we all thought they were going to go undefeated again. There was no reason to think they wouldn't. And then Brady goes down, and now all of a sudden the entire outlook for the AFC East changed. Everybody knew that there was a chance.
It's crazy to say this because it's almost 10 years ago, but at the time you thought this is going to be the year where it changes. it did not.
No, things were good for the first quarter of the season. Week 2 in Jacksonville, Edwards 20 of 25 for 239 yards, has a touchdown pass to James Hardy with 4 minutes to go to put the Bills in front. You got your quarterback, maybe, but your number 2 wideout, this rookie that you're putting in this role, it's a lot to put on him. And here he is delivering in week 2.
I remember that touchdown vividly because that was the prototypical play that they wanted from James Hardy. It was him leaping in the back of the end zone, using his size. It was everything you could have wanted for him, but that was pretty much it for him. So unfortunately, that was it. It didn't last much longer, but that play was phenomenal.
The following week, the Bills host the Oakland Raiders. Marshawn Lynch playing his hometown team. He has 2 touchdowns in this game. Ryan Lindell kicks a 38-yard field goal as time expires. Once again, the Cardiac Bills coming back in the fourth quarter. They're 3-0. The same time the Dolphins blow out the Patriots, so the Bills are in first place in the AFC East. It's the first 3-0 start for the Bills since 1992. You're not printing your playoff tickets yet, but, I mean, maybe this team has figured it out, right?
Still thinking about it. Although I will say this. I took the 2-0 Drew Bledsoe start in 03.
02.
Was 02.
Yeah.
When I forget, it was 03 because it was the Patriots game and then they followed with Jacksonville.
Correct.
Yep. So 2-0 that year. I thought that team had a chance.
Yeah.
3-0 with Trent Edwards and Dick Duran. nah. Still, show me more.
Well,
show me more.
I mean, again, the thing, even in these 2 wins, they didn't play great in those games up until the end. So there was that kind of, are they for real or are they not? But again, I remember the stadium going nuts that day. I mean, I remember when Trent had a late throw to set up that field goal, and the stadium was just off the charts.
Following week, the Bills go to St. Louis. They trailed 14-6 at halftime, score the final 25 points. They win that game 31-14. They're 4-0. Over 80% of teams that start seasons 4-0 go to the playoffs. All this talk about Drought, I mean, it's over. They've got Russ Brandon now running the show. Everything's got to be great, right?
Well, and maybe I was playing contrarian then, but I remember the Jabari Greer interception.
Yep.
He runs it back for a touchdown. I think it gave him the lead.
Return.
Yeah,
it was a great return.
But the throw was awful.
Oh,
I mean, the throw was 8 yards over the head of the receiver. It could have been to Greer. You know, it wasn't even a good throw to Greer, but Greer had the best chance. It was that kind of thing I looked at with this team and thought, how many more of these are they going to get this year?
Well,
you know,
this was another. I mean, they were awful in the first half. So again, you remember it was like, okay, which team is for real here? Is it the first half where they looked like they were going to get destroyed by a not very good, Rams team? Or is it the team that somehow found a way to come back with weird plays and interceptions and whatnot?
And for whatever reason here at the station, we had a group of, because I did a few of the games I was in the station, and we had a group of Bills fans that worked on Sundays all together. So what they would do is they would gather in sub-control where we have our control room, but they'd put out the Bills on the biggest TV they could find, and they'd all hang out and watch it. And it's right next to the sports office. So for the duration of this start, I'm watching the game as a reporter covering it objectively. Whatever the Bills do, they do. These people, even though they're behind a wall and a closed door, would get so excited for what the Bills did. And you had all these plays. You had the fake field goal touchdown. You had the Greer interception return. You had all these big plays. They were shouting and screaming. And look, I didn't mind it because, well, I did mind it because that's why I'm talking about it. But they had a right to get excited. But it bothered me to the point where, like, I started actively, like, rooting against the Bills for a little while just to get these people to be quiet and let me do some work in the office. It was that was a good idea of what it was like for a Bills fan. 4-0, like you said, first time in like 20 years. You know, they're good, they're exciting, they're making big plays, they're coming back from behind. People in Western New York were unbelievably up in arms for this team. And I remember at the end of that season, and we're going to get to where this goes. We all know where it goes. But I remember talking to people when they were 4-0, 5-1, and if I had told them what was going to happen, they would have, not only would they have not believed me, they would have punched me in the face for even bringing it up.
I have a great Dante Whitner quote from around this time about Trent Edwards. You have guys like Peyton Manning and Tom Brady and these good quarterbacks around the league. I think it's time to start mentioning Trent Edwards as one of those good quarterbacks.
Oh, no. And week 5, the Bills travel on the road to the West Coast. They take on the Arizona Cardinals. Third play of the game, Adrian Wilson, a head-to-head collision with Trent Edwards. Edwards done for the game with a concussion. In comes J.P. Lossman. And did you sense then that, a concussion with Edwards and that the air is kind of getting let out of the balloon now? That 4-0 start is already in the rear view because...
Well, they got destroyed in this game,
and they get crushed in this game, too.
So it was all
41-17. Kurt Warner looks like Kurt Warner from The Greatest Show on Turf as the Cardinals win by 24 points.
Well, the Bills had a built-in excuse with Edwards getting hurt. So it wasn't, okay, the season's over, this is the real team. It was, all right, well, things went really bad after things have been going really good for 4 weeks in a row. So you were due for this kind of game. You know, again, there's going to be a bye. The Chargers are coming in after that. Let's see. Show me more. You know, I don't think anyone bailed off the bandwagon at that point, but, you know, it certainly wasn't a good sign.
It happened with both Trent and then later with Ryan Fitzpatrick, where you remember this big hit and they were never the same again. Both quarterbacks swore that wasn't the reason for their ineffectiveness afterwards, but it sure looks like it.
And really with Trent Edwards, and you and I talked about this before, you know, that there's always going to be the thought of what if he doesn't get hurt? Now, that no one's going to ever claim.
Well, and with everything we know now about concussions, again, I mean, it's not like this was 20 years ago, but still, we know a lot more now than we did even then.
Yeah.
So,
but no one is ever going to claim that Trent Edwards was going to be any kind of all-star or Pro Bowl quarterback. But they had something going that year. I mean, maybe that year, if Edwards stays healthy and doesn't get that concussion, maybe they find a way to make the playoffs and he looks good for a year and a half. You know, maybe he's, you know, Ryan Fitzpatrick with the Jets or Mark Baldwin with the Rams, that kind of thing.
I still wasn't completely sold on him. I never loved his style of play. You know, we know now how often he checked down. I mean, that really rubbed me the wrong way from the first time I saw him. But it was hard to argue with the results up to that point, up to that Arizona game.
Bills going to the bye week at 4-1, and during the bye week, they have themselves a trade with the Indianapolis Colts. John McCargo, who's been dealing with injuries his entire Bills career, traded the Colts for a 4th-round pick. 2 days later, nope. Trade's reported. McCargo fails his physical. He has a bulging disc discovered in his back, and you know, on the power rankings of Bills busts from the drought, McCargo top 3.
Yeah, one
maybe
or two.
Maybe one.
I mean, McCargo was like, he's like the Titanic. You know, he ran into the iceberg, the ship sinks, they somehow float it back up, and then they run into another iceberg and sink the damn thing again. I mean, nothing that happened, it wasn't all his fault. Probably wasn't any of it was his fault.
The thing with him, though, he never had that passion or that drive. I mean, he had some bizarre quotes that you wouldn't expect from football players. When I talked to him one-on-one, he didn't seem to really love football. I'm sure that when he was traded to Indianapolis that they met with him, and body language is a thing. I'm sure they worked him out and saw, you know, Bill Kohler, I don't think is the D-line coach at the time anymore. So maybe you covered this in an older episode. But when I think of Bill Kohler, I just think of him screaming at John McCargo every practice. That was him. McCargo, I mean, he was trying to light a fire under this guy. He didn't have that passion.
What was, you know, your feelings like of interacting with him? Was he easy to talk to? Was he a guy that would answer questions? Did he duck the media? What was that like?
No, I mean, he was kind of a shy guy, but he was willing to talk. But again, he was lacking that drive. You could see it, you could feel it. At practice, he didn't know how to put it into another gear and really work hard.
Well, oh well.
They'll do it. Yeah.
So the Bills come out of the bye, and you mentioned the San Diego Chargers. Edwards starts 25 of 30, 83.3% completion percentage is the Bills' record for completion percentage in a game. It still stands to this day. Marshawn Lynch, 70 yards on the ground and a touchdown. Lee Evans, 89 yards. With his new contract, he gets a touchdown as well. Bills control the time of possession, 35 minutes to 24 minutes. They win 23-14. They're 5-1. Now we're getting into the season.
Oh, yeah.
It's not 2 games, it's 3 games. Yeah. We are 6 games plus a bye, so 7 weeks in, and they are first place in the AFC East.
Appreciate you, man. Hell of a game. You're about 7-6 in that freaking interception. Nice pick. Yeah, man. Right now.
I thought it was legit then. Now, maybe not. I'm going to make my playoff plans now. But after that game, and part of that, too, was what you thought San Diego was going to be. You know, they were a legit team. They had Phillip Rivers. And it turned out that year they really weren't that good. But that was the game where I started taking the Bills that season seriously. It didn't last long.
Well, because before that was the Arizona game where you thought, okay, it's over. And then they come back and do this. And you're like, okay, maybe that was just an aberration. Maybe, you know.
And look at the teams they beat, too. It was Seattle, Oakland, the Rams.
Yeah.
You know, who was the fourth team? I forgot one already.
Oakland.
Seattle, Oakland, Rams.
No,
Jacksonville. So you got 4 doormats. Yeah. At that time, those 4 teams were all bottom of the league.
Jacksonville wasn't terrible. They were a good team.
But they weren't. Yeah, they weren't great teams. But I will say, I didn't go back and watch this game. But if I remember correctly, I don't know if San Diego's pass rushers got a whiff of Trent in this game, and that was always his problem. He would check the ball down when somebody got after him. So I think he was able to sit in the pocket, sit a little longer, and then dump it off, and that played to one of his few strengths.
And Edwards is back playing even after the concussion he suffered in the loss against Arizona. Week 8. The good feelings from the 5-1 start, they ain't here in Miami, as once again the Bills come up short in Dolphin Stadium, Landshark Stadium, whatever it's being called that week. Marshawn Lynch has a touchdown to start the second half. Bills are up 16-7 in this game. but the Dolphins score the remaining 18 points. And now we're seeing the problems on this Bills team appear as teams have made adjustments to what the Bills had done over the first 6 weeks. And now was this kind of a moment where you thought, all right, this is maybe the Bills that we were expecting in 2008?
It was the next game. It was really the next game, because you lose at Miami, you lose the division road game, those things happen, especially for a team that's still trying to find its way. So I didn't bail on them at that point. The next game was going to be the bellwether game.
To me, every game after the San Diego game completely blended together. To me, I remember.
Well, they are almost the same circumstance. Yeah. 3 straight games against the AFC East. 3 straight, spoiler alert, 3 straight L's for the Buffalo Bills.
Yeah, I mean, I remember vividly each of those wins, specifically what happened in those games, and then you look to the second half of that season after those San Diego, it's all one game to me. I mean, it was all the same, rinse, repeat, that's just what it was.
Well, we'll go through these pretty quickly. Week 9, you mentioned that next game at home against the New York Jets, and it's a good Jets team. I believe they were 5-3 at this point, or 5-2.
Brett Favre.
4-3 going into this game. Nance and Sims, you got the CBS #1 crew in Orchard Park, and the Bills lay an egg. Brett Favre leads an 8-minute drive for the game-sealing field goal late as the Jets win 26-17. So now they've dropped back-to-back games to AFC East teams, and they're finding themselves falling in the standings as well.
The weird thing about that game is that the Bills had a long drive. The second quarter had 2 drives in it. One was a long Bills drive that the Jets ran a pickback for a touchdown.
Sure was.
And then the other one was a long Bills drive that ended up in a field goal. So, I mean, the Bills pretty much had the ball the whole second quarter, and yet you felt like the Jets pretty much physically dominated the game. It felt like the Jets came up to Buffalo and punched the Bills in the mouth. Even though the score was closer than it 26-17 was the final, that was in part because Favre, being Favre, threw a pick for a touchdown when it was 23-10 in the fourth quarter. The Jets were in control. But to show you, exactly. But to show you where the Jets were in that game, so they hand the Bills 7 points. They make it a 6-point game with 10 minutes to go, and then the Jets go 8 minutes down the field, converting third downs, controlling the ball, running the clock out, kick a field goal, game over. That was the game. The Jets were in charge of it pretty much from the start.
Abram Elam has a 92-yard pick six.
Yeah, that's the one.
So there you go. And then the following week, even if it is Matt Castle, it's still in Foxborough. It's still against Bill Belichick. Patriots win 20-10, and so in 4 weeks, they've gone from first to worst in the AFC East. Pats win 20-10 as Matt Castle throws for 234 yards against the Bills.
You could not lose those 3 games in a row, against the division and feel like you had a chance. Yep. Even at 5-4, you came out of that thinking that the notice has been served where the Bills are going to be.
Well, it was just the way it happened. I mean, you watch these games, you saw, okay, they were pretenders. You knew it.
Yeah, despite what the score said.
You knew it.
So 3 straight losses against the AFC East, but hey, the Bills have to play the Cleveland Browns, the hapless Cleveland Browns on Monday Night Football. So you've got Bills fans in Orchard Park the whole Monday getting ready for Monday night.
But this game was the please don't let us get embarrassed on national TV game.
And they've had many of them. And then Trent Edwards throws 3 picks on the first 4 drives. Edwards has 3 picks in his first 7 pass attempts. McKelvin has a 98-yard kickoff return for a touchdown, but Brady Quinn leads a go-ahead drive. Late in this game, Ryan Lindell misses a field goal in the final minute. The Browns win 29-27, and a 5-1 start is now 5-5.
It was, you think about Browns games the Bills have played in this drought, and this game could easily be the weirdest one, were it not for 6-3 and 8-0 in the snow. But this game was, every time you thought you had a handle on it, it took a right turn. Trent Edwards did those 3 picks in the first quarter. The Browns got, I think, 6 points off of them.
Yeah, the Browns are terrible.
Exactly. But yet the Browns still led by 10 or 12 or 14 in the second half, and the Bills come back to take the lead. So now you're thinking, all right, well, the Bills finally got control of this game. Then they give up the lead. Then they make a late drive. They have a field goal to win the game. And Ryan Lindell, who was one of the few things that you could depend on this time, blows the field goal at the end of the game. So just the whole game made 0 sense.
Like you said, if it weren't for the other Bills-Browns games, this really, I mean, I remember it was a weird night, too. There was a big fire by the stadium that led to a weird traffic situation beforehand. A lot of people were late to the game because of that. It was just a weird night.
That is weird.
Every time the Browns play the Bills.
Every time.
Just about.
Yeah, we'll get to that 6-3 one soon enough. Week 12, the Bills go on the road to Kansas City to face a 1-9 Chiefs team. The Bills put up 54 points. And we've mentioned this in pretty much every episode up to this one. You look at the schedule for the Bills over the whole season, and you go, which result doesn't work with the others? 54 points from a team that cannot score makes no sense to me. And I mean, I know it's a bad Chiefs team, and you look at the box score, and okay, you see that, Edwards threw for 273 and 2 touchdowns. Marshawn Lynch ran for a touchdown. McKelvin has a 64-yard pick six. The defense forces 5 turnovers. But, 54 points is just such an aberration. It really sticks out as an outlier from this 08 season.
You play 16 games, you're going to have one where everything goes right. That was that game.
That's what it was. It was just the reverse of that Arizona game.
Yeah.
Just the Chiefs just completely fell on their face.
Week 13, the Bills at home against the San Francisco 49ers, and you lose a game to Sean Hill. I think that was the quarterback for the 49ers in this game. Jerron gets the first that I could find of columns and articles calling for Jerron to be fired. The Bills lose at home 10-3 to a bad 49ers team.
This 10-3 game is the game that thanks the Lord for the 6-3 game. Because otherwise, we talk about there would have been a 10. This game was almost as bad. Only because it had a touchdown does it rise above 6-3. But it was that bad.
It was awful. And again, we're not going to talk for 4 hours on this, but some of these games where Trent Edwards just wouldn't throw the ball down the field, and he would just jet the ball down and jet the ball down and jet the ball down, and they were awful to watch. And the offense, particularly late in this season, they just couldn't do anything.
This whole Lossman-Edwards era is the offensive football. You can't overestimate how bad it was. It was just brutal. And it got to the point where the conversation wasn't, will the Bills ever be good again? It's, will the Bills ever be entertaining enough that we can't want to tear our eyes out, balls out in the fourth quarter of these games?
It was unwatchable. Their offense is unwatchable.
Jerron says after the game, the problems come from communication. They have problems communicating. And you talk about things that come up again down the road, Rex Ryan. The Bills are 6-6. Edwards injures his groin in this game, so Lossman has to come in. And Lossman, I believe, is the quarterback for 2 of the next 3 games. And it's just, we are deep in the drought now. We go back to years like 02, 03, 04. You go like, are the Bills in their playoff drought? No, they are in it. There is no way out of this sea of mediocrity. And now we've all this talk about the doom and gloom, and now the Bills have to go to Toronto. I can't even imagine covering a team that is really going nowhere, but they're not bottoming out because they're not that bad, but they're totally uninteresting and totally irrelevant. And now, the city that is going to pick them away from Western New York is welcoming them in, and it's against the Miami Dolphins as well. So just the lead up to that Toronto game in that week, what was that like?
It was hard. Although we talked about how the Dolphins rivalry really waned from about 03-04 to this point.
Especially as the Patriots ascend.
Exactly. Yep. It was hard for Bills fans to just come to grips with, it was the little extra twist on the whole Toronto thing about, by the way, it's going to be a Dolphins home game too.
This is a Dolphins home game.
They were some of the most bizarre games I've ever seen in my life. Just the atmosphere, the way the fans were up there. They weren't Bills fans. They were NFL fans. They'd be wearing Raiders and Steelers jerseys.
It was like a London game.
It was it was utterly bizarre. And again, it took a while for the Bills to score a touchdown up there, if I remember correctly. They didn't in this game.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, 3 years.
They didn't give anything to cheer about anyways.
Yeah.
Back-to-back games. Bills lose this game to the Dolphins 16-3. Back-to-back games without a touchdown. First time that's happened to the Bills since 2003. But another note about this game that, I don't know, maybe it's just coincidence and that's all it is. But 5 days before the game itself, Ted Rogers, the guy that brokers the deal with Ralph Wilson, dies from heart failure at 75. And you just think about the pall kind of casted over this series, and Ted Rogers is just one guy. But that, this whole series seems doomed from the start, even though the Bills are going to be making more money than God, from this series in Toronto, and the $250 average ticket sales as opposed to $50 at the Ralph.
I think people looked at this series, and maybe not fans, but organizers, just figured we're going to take the most popular sport in North America, or at least in the United States. We're going to put it in a gigundous city with lots of people and money.
The 5th biggest city in North America.
And it's just going to work. We don't have to put anything into it. No one thought about, we talked about this before, where to park everyone. Parking was a disaster. You were outside for over an hour. I've never sat, I told Mark this earlier, I've never sat in a stadium complex where I could see the stadium and not be able to park anywhere for a longer period of time than that first game. There was nowhere to tailgate. Fans were into the game because they didn't have an allegiance to either team, so it was just a variety of fans sitting wherever. Nothing worked, and you saw it right away, and it felt like no one realized, okay, we're going to put an NFL team in Toronto, but we're going to have to actually try and market it and make it interesting. They just figured it was just going to happen.
Everything about it from step one to the end was planned so poorly. It's a prime example of what not to do. Really, like you said, I remember it wasn't this game, but it was the first preseason game. I spent 2 hours trying to show somebody my parking ticket, where the media was. Nobody knew what was going on. It was an utter disaster.
In his column after the game, Jerry Sullivan of the Buffalo News called it the saddest day in franchise history. Apt?
I don't know about that. I mean, they did just blow a playoff game to a third-string Steelers team 4 years earlier. So
and they did lose 4 Super Bowls.
But again, it was bad on this whole different level.
Yes.
This cloud you mentioned earlier, that describes it perfectly.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the work week. It is Monday morning. Hope your week gets started off a little bit better and that you're over the Bills' loss yesterday. It was, in a word, disgusting. The Bills lost to the Dolphins in Toronto 16-3. And speaking of disgusting, John Kutchko caught up with Bills owner Ralph Wilson after the game, and he was not a happy guy.
The Bills' foray into this Canadian marketplace, in a word, was a disaster today. The Dolphins love the climate-controlled Rogers Center. Chad Pennington with a 20-yard touchdown pass to Anthony Fasano in the first quarter. Dolphins won 16-3, and the Bills owner was not happy afterward.
Oh, we just didn't play well. We haven't got the talent. We didn't play well. The coaches, they can't go out and kick the ball. They can't go out and tackle. What else is there?
Following week, the Bills go to the Meadowlands. Sean Ellis recovers a Lossman fumble, returns it for a touchdown. The Bills have a victory snatched away from them because of their brilliant quarterback, J.P. Lossman. So 7 losses in their last 8 games. They lose 31-27. Jerron takes the fall for the play calling. And at this point, were you assuming the axe is going to be swinging soon at Jerron? Or was there kind of a feeling that maybe he might get a 4th year because the Bills aren't, they're not 3-13, they're 6-8.
You were wondering, for sure.
We didn't know who was in charge.
Yeah.
We really didn't know if it was going to be Russ or Modrat and John Guy in the football department, or their power structure, or Ralph. Because he was still capable of doing that at the time.
Right.
So it was just you didn't know.
We could probably spend a half hour in that Jets game too. Stevie Johnson looks good for the first time ever.
I went back. I saw what I wrote for that game, and I saw that I wrote that the Lossman play was one of the worst plays in modern Bills. I didn't even remember it. There's been so many bad Bills plays since then that have since eclipsed that play.
I can specifically remember that play because I was up. It was one of the few games at that time that I worked in the press box. So I'm up in the press box. I got my laptop open. I'm covering. I'm writing stuff down. And you have to go down a little early if you're in the press box to do interviews. So you go down maybe 3-4 minutes to go. And the Bills had the ball
and the lead.
Yeah. And they had a running game that the Jets weren't stopping. So I had closed up my laptop. I had put it away, and I was like 2 steps out of my seat to go down. I looked down, and the moment you see Lossman do this, you're like, oh. So then the Jets recover the fumble right back. Yeah. And I remember I put the laptop back on, I take it out, I open it back up, I type some new stuff, and then I went back down later, and it was totally Billsy. Totally Billsy.
Yep. Kavika Mitchell says the following game, we're going to win this game for Coach Jerron. They do just that. They win in Denver 30-23 to go to 7-8.
And that was that game. I mean, that whole game felt like win it for Jerron. After the game, they win the game. It wasn't quite we won the Super Bowl, but there was a palpable success. We accomplished this. Yeah. They wanted that game for Coach.
And the players liked Jerron because he was easy on them. I mean, that's really, everybody always says he's a player's coach, he's such a great guy. No, he was easy on them. He didn't work them hard in practice.
Right.
I think this was the year where George Wilson, 2 weeks later, locker room cleanout day, saying, keep Jerron. He's shouting it as he leaves the locker room. I mean, the players did like him, but again, he was easy on them. He wasn't a tough head coach, and I think they liked that.
The following week, the final game of the regular season against the New England Patriots. The Pats are playing for a playoff spot. They need a Miami loss. You don't think about the Patriots needing a win and get in situation in Week 17. So, of course, even without Brady, they're going to beat the Bills, and they do just that. They win 13-0. But the Pats missed the playoffs at 11-5, which is a rarity over these 17 years. So the Bills go 0-6 in the AFC East in a year without Tom Brady. Their third straight 7-9 season. They are the third team since the NFL went to a 16-game schedule in 1978 to start 5-1 and finish with a losing record. Forget about playoffs. And since 1978, 139 teams have started 5-1 or 6-0. 121 of them made the playoffs. 87%. The Bills fall in that little sliver on the pie chart. They are the 13%. Ralph Wilson at 89 says the decision on Jerron will be made Wednesday, December 31st after the season. So I guess we'll just to put a bow on 2008. Your feelings, fellows, after a third straight 7-9 season with Mr. Dick Jauron.
I couldn't believe, because I actually spent time that season researching to figure out if anyone had ever gone 5-1 and then finished up with a losing record. I think the Bills, they were the third losing record, but they're the first ever to lose 9 games. I think both the other teams were 7-8-1. So, again, the Bills finding a new record low to hit. It was shake your head bad. And then to go 7-9 3 years in a row, that quickly became Jeff Fisher gets the 7-9 mantra, but Dick Jauron could have easily been the guy.
Yeah. Well, this season was a tale of two halves. I mean, you had that early start, and then, when you get to that, we talked about the 49ers team. When you get to these later games, it seemed like that start was 13 years earlier. I mean, it seemed like two completely different teams. I think we all felt Dick Jauron had to go at this time, but he probably wouldn't, given, again, the power structure.
Maybe not had to go, but certainly should go.
Yeah, should go, but it probably wouldn't, and then he ends up staying.
Yeah, well, spoiler alert.
Sorry.
But yes, so 2008 ends with a 7-9 season. Dick Jauron is out of a contract. His 3-year deal is up at the end of 2008, so what are the Bills going to do with their head coaching job? To that, we turn to the next episode of Down and Drought.